Welcome to the Wellness Esquire Podcast. I'm Ariella, and I am so grateful for you to join me for this incredibly important conversation with Shaun Bernstein. Shaun is a former lawyer and journalist turned storyteller who now runs his own writing and communications agency. His path to where he is today involved a courageous and life-saving decision to walk away from the legal profession entirely. Shaun and I talk about his journey, starting with his unique perspective entering law school, viewing that a JD was not a final destination, but a stepping stone to something else. We talk about the pressure of practicing employment law, where the weight of his clients' livelihoods began to feel like an impossible burden to carry. Shaun talks about the darkness that began to set in, the disconnect between his high-functioning exterior and his internal mental health crisis, and the moment he realized that the speed of impact in mental health advocacy can be a matter of life and death for those in our profession. This conversation is a powerful look at what happens when we stop trying to fit into a mold that is breaking us. And Shaun reminds us that there is no shame in choosing a different path and that your worth is not defined by a billable hour. I know a lot of people need to hear Shaun's story, and a lot of people will relate to it. Thank you so much for listening, and enjoy. All right. Well, I'm so delighted to talk to you. We've obviously been connected.
You're real. There's a human behind this.
You're real. There's a human on the other side of this. And it's so much fun to have these up and backs on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And, I liked you already, but Aww. It's so fun to actually, see the real human on the other side. And, when you posted, I know you've been posting about this, before I saw it, but when I saw your post about leaving law because of your mental health, I was like, another layer that we can get into. Fantastic. Oh, yeah. Let's talk about it.
Glad to.
So thank you for, chatting about it, but also just for already being so open about it because it's so important. Yeah, it is.
It's so important. And it's, we're starting to have the conversation, but we're starting way too slow. You talked about speed of impact. I mean, that's a really big one where speed of impact of, making an actual change in the profession is going to save lives. And if it's delayed unnecessarily, you're, really without an explanation, you're going to see people suffer and not in good ways.
Yeah. So let's back up a little bit. What led you to law school in the first place?
So I joke that law was my plan B, which, and truly it was. People find that ridiculous because for most people, kids who walk around banging a toy gavel, law is their dream. For me, it really was the backup. My mother went to law school. She practiced for a couple of years. She left when I was born. My uncle is a fairly prominent lawyer in Toronto. So I knew a little bit of what it looked like. I knew I didn't want his life, and I didn't really know what hers looked like from a working sense. And there wasn't a crazy family pressure, but my mother would slide the alumni magazines across the dining room table and say, just look at what they're doing. Out of her class, she was in the 80s and a time where there were not as many women in the profession. And out of her classmates, a lot of them went on to other careers. They went on to go start businesses. They went on to very successful corporate careers, etc. So I was always sort of taught that law was a road to doing something else. And that the pressure was not to stay in practice, but use it as a stepping stone to accomplish something great.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's not commonly part of people when there is pressure or when there is sort of guidance around someone. I don't feel like I tend to hear the story of, and it can be a great stepping stone. I feel like the story that I tend to hear is once you discover that you might be miserable, don't worry, there are other things you can do.
Yeah, no, it was a bit of a script flip, I think, in that sense. But I'm glad that it was. It certainly made me more comfortable with the idea of leaving and using it to do other things. And it wasn't a strategic choice. I mean, I left out of illness, and I talk about that quite openly. But I think I felt maybe less restrained than I might have had I seen it as that be all end all. I was not that kid that dreamed of being a lawyer, and I wasn't that kid that dreamed of it for 40 years and then retiring onto a yacht somewhere. Like, that was just not the life that I ever wanted. I never thought I would do it for more than about 5, maybe 10 years, and then I would do something else.
Interesting.
Yeah, okay. So that helped with the transition out for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So what did your life look like when you were practicing, in particular from a mental health standpoint, from the outside and from the inside?
So I'll give you kind of three different answers because it does start to change over time. So in Canada, we do a year of articling, which is basically a year of sort of apprenticeship where you're training as a student lawyer. And that's really hard for a lot of people. A lot of them wind up at these big, office tower firms where they're working like 20-hour days, truly, and, 100+ hour weeks. That wasn't me. I had this great experience training, and I worked for really kind, genuine, truly great people. And so I kind of got a picture of what law could be of, oh, okay, I could see this working. I then moved into a firm which really had nobody. It was one lawyer who, after her first year of practice, decided to hire on two associates. So there were three of us. And I mean, truly the blind leading the blind. We were all way too new and just trying to figure things out. And it was not a good experience at all. And did not, and without trying to besmirch anyone, did not go well at all. And I did that for about 6 months. And it was a really rough ride, not even so much for my mental health as for a lot of other things. It just was not a workable situation for me moving forward. My mental health suffered, but not the same way that it did later. And I resigned after 6 months, and I said, okay, I said, I'm done. I gave this a shot. I knew I didn't want to do this forever. I've tried it. Turns out I really hate it. I'm good. And I left. I walked away. I had had other careers. My first run was in journalism, and I had some HR background. And I thought, okay, let's go explore the world and see what I wind up doing. My third time in, I had left. I wound up in a marketing group at a large nationwide law firm. And my last stint in practice, the one that I speak about regularly, was my dream firm calling me and saying, hey, if you want to come join us, they actually had a mat leave open, which in Canada are quite long. And they said, if you want to come join us, this is a great opportunity to do it, because I'd wanted to join them for years. And I said, I'm not going to leave a very cushy gig for mat leave, but if you make it full time, we'll talk. And they did, and I took it. It was a fairly small firm with some great people. And, what I thought was going to be this great experience. Like, if I was going to do the work I wanted to do, this is the place that I want to do it. Stop me, by the way, if I'm droning on way too. I know you'll edit the heck out of me, but feel free to slow me down. So if I was going to do that work, this is the place that I wanted to do it. And it started out really well. And it kind of started to drag as a couple months went on. I was getting married. We were planning a honeymoon. There was a lot of moving pieces. We just bought a house. In my personal life, there was a lot of, change, a lot of moving pieces going on. And a very thankfully supportive partner. But there was certainly a lot of strain coming, partly through work, and I will never, blame the firm, but certainly some through, professional responsibilities, even though the expectations were not unrealistic. They were not, Bay Street, Wall Street, what have you. It wasn't nearly like that, but certainly still high expectations. And I think the work of the business itself, law is a really challenging, as it's a really challenging, really ugly business at times that can be very, very stressful to the people involved, whether it's the parties themselves and, a dispute, or the lawyers. And it's hard not to feel that strain. It's hard not to take any of it home. It's hard not to cave into, 24-hour work expectations. I was doing employment and human rights. And so I had basically someone's money on the line where, let's say you're a parent of three, maybe you're the breadwinner, you've just been let go, and I'm your hope of getting something decent to get packaged out with. Otherwise, you're trying to figure out how to feed the kids next week, and I'm the guy you're calling. Yeah, no pressure there.
None at all.
So and so there were certainly a couple files. There were a lot of things that were really starting to bother me, and I can go into more of the story and sort of the journey through if you'd like.
Yeah, so I'd love for you to go through, a few things. I mean, one, just like kind of paint a picture of what your life was like, in terms of practice, in terms of, your personal life, how the work started to really take a toll on you. And in particular, could anyone pick up on this from the outside? What did your mental health look like from the outside, to an outside observer? And how did you feel on the inside? And how did those two things, connect, if at all?
Well, fasten your seatbelt because it gets dark. Um,
Go for it. I think people need to hear it.
I do. And, I will preface this with, I do think the brain protects us from a lot of trauma. And so I don't know that I remember everything,
Sure.
as crystal clear as I might have at the time. It's thankfully been 6 years. I've come out the other side of it. I started to really notice the decline, and that, I was struggling, and I was struggling with the anxiety of it. I am someone who, I trained in a newsroom. My background, like I said, is as a journalist. So I always feel pressure to get things done very quickly. If I come back from lunch and you leave a file on my chair, I expect to be working on it right away and to drop everything else. And that's not always the expectation of the person who left it there. But my brain says, no, you need to do this now. If an email comes in, I will usually be the person to drop everything to respond to it.
And
No,
I
some people
think
need to
a
wait.
whole lot of lawyers can relate to that.
Yeah, it's and
Absolutely.
law. Practicing law to me is like holding a fire extinguisher and just kind of running it across your desk and trying to put out whatever's currently on fire. While the next thing, it's the whack-a-mole of fighting fire. That's a terrible mixed metaphor, but bear with me. But there's always something new popping up, and you're always sort of trying to figure out how to solve it. So I started by about the 6 month mark in to really see some signs of trouble. And I don't have a lengthy history of any diagnosed anxiety disorder, but I've had anxiety issues in the past. I have been through counseling. I was not unfamiliar with the mental health space. Ironically, I was also a workplace mental health lawyer. That's a lot of what employment law is here, and a lot of the conversation as of late is improving mental health. And so dealing with workplace mental health. And I am, doing that work for others as I'm noticing my own starting to suffer, going, well, this is ironic. And let's just get the popcorn and live, outside my body for a minute. Um, so I started to, worry, and I pursued some counseling, which I'm not adverse to at all. Thankfully, it wasn't, and I talk about how I'm so glad that I listened to my body throughout all of this, and that I didn't, push back, because that truly might have killed me. So I went through some counseling that was actually provided, I think, through either our insurance or the Law Society, one of the two. And this is coming, into spring, so I'm already about 6, 7 months in, and I was about to go on my honeymoon, and met a couple times with a social worker who listened patiently, and she said, "You're not stressed. You're not depressed. You just need a new job. Sorry, you're not depressed. You just need a new job." And I went, I mean, that's interesting. I literally have just been at this for a few months. Also, I'm going away. Maybe that'll help. I'm taking 2 weeks. They're letting me sort of, shut my phone off. They were very good. It was my honeymoon. So they were wonderful. And, okay, and I don't want to start any medications before I'm traveling. That's going to mess up my insurance opportunities. Take a step back, just go away and see if we can, help reset things. And I, again, was not a stranger to mental health. So I was probably at this point already had started meditating more frequently. Um, and I was really doing, sort of the best that I could. And we went away and loved it. And we went away, I guess, mid to late May. And I had cleared as much, sort of off my plate as I could, and things were in decent shape, and my colleagues were helping with my files. And it all went, relatively smoothly. And I think I checked email once from Italy, but I was pretty good. Like, I really didn't deal with anything, and everything was okay. And when I did respond to one of the things, they said, "Stop, go enjoy your vacation." They were good with me, because I think my colleagues already by that point, I'm sure I had been open with them, and they already started to know that I was having some challenges. There was, the lawyer that I worked for. There's one other lawyer that was with me, who was a little bit more senior, and we're still good friends. And then three clerks and admin staff. And they knew some of the challenges, and they, certainly had their own job stresses. And I get back, and I'm refreshed, and I'm speaking Italian, and I'm, tanned and living my best life. And within 3 days, I was basically collapsing again. I went, okay, this is not good. This is not a place that I can get through. And I am grateful. I knew my body. I knew what to watch for. Uh, I knew, and I was crying in the bathroom on breaks and at lunches, and like really difficult. I knew I was not doing well. And I phoned a cousin of mine who's a psychiatrist, and was grateful, and we were supportive of each other. Nice guy. He married into the family, and I said to him, "What do I watch for? Like, here's what's going on. What am I watching for that I need to really take action?" And he gave me a couple things. The worst thing of some symptoms where and I knew what to watch for, and I was not making plans. I can say that it wasn't there yet. I knew that was certainly something that when the really dark thoughts start to come in, you're in trouble. Uh, but I knew that was on the horizon, and it was getting worse. And I was trying to do whatever I could in terms of my own. I'd been through a lot of CBT. I knew my own coping toolkit. I knew sort of how to build some of those resources, and nothing was working. And I was, meditating and trying to sleep and get, exercise and every yada yada yada. Nothing was working, and I was just barely holding it together. And I had at least been good. Yes, you'll check the email at 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. and usually 4 a.m. and that's just law of life, right? That's the profession. I was trying to be pretty good about that. But I was really trying to be good about compartmentalizing, at least for myself when I got home. I was newly married. My wife was very patient, but, again, newly married, want to enjoy our life together. I had friends, I had a social circle. I was on a trivia team that, brought me a lot of joy. And I noticed that I was starting to bleed through to the point where it really was impacting my personal relationships. I was no longer getting joy from, going out and seeing friends, which is truly my elixir. Uh, Thankfully, my marriage wasn't struggling, but it certainly was starting to feel the strain of, oh, this isn't the guy that I met. This is a man, in a serious psychological issue. Uh, Loyal and and kind and compassionate to a fault, she was, but sort of at a certain point you realize that okay, that I'm not. I know for myself, I'm not the person that she just married. What's happening here? This is not going well. And I started to really, I was losing the battle pretty quickly. I say openly now, I left in July. I say I don't think I would have lived till Christmas. And again, I got out before that, ideation stage came together. I knew that was coming next. And I really, I hadn't been there in a very long time, but I knew that was on the horizon. Uh, my entire team knew. The thing that was not suffering until the very end was my work.
Hmm.
I was able professionally to try to hold it together. In those last couple days, my boss called me in and said, "This isn't good. Like this, he for whatever reasons, and I will never chew him out publicly, but he didn't see a lot of things, whether I was hiding it or what have you. He didn't notice, what I think some other people saw, and maybe we just didn't interact as much one on one."
What kind of things? What do you feel other people noticed that he missed?
I certainly was, I would say in retrospect, I was very muted, sunken posture, avoiding eye contact, very inward. You're going to hear from this. I've got a big personality. I'm an extrovert. I love talking to people. So when you see me slumped over and, and I had days where I was catatonic, you could have thrown a ball at my head. I wouldn't have responded. In my office, which, that's not good. Um, so I don't know, how, if I was just hiding it really well, or I have a theater background. I'm sure I was doing some performance work in hindsight. And he started to notice, and I broke down in his office and I said, I'm once my colleague, I said to him initially, once my partner returns from the mat leave, I think I'm out. And he understood and he said, okay. And that was supposed to be September. And this was already sort of, early to mid July. And it was just day after day where I knew what I had said to my cousin was, at what point do I pull the goalie? Like, at what point am I, going to a doctor and saying, okay, this isn't good? Thank God I wasn't at the point of going to emerge. It wasn't there, but I have to go see my GP. We have to do something. And he, gave me those couple things of what to watch for. And I knew those were approaching. And so literally I did just that. I booked an appointment. It was a Friday. I had my last consult. I will tell you, and I'll never reveal, but I take a lot of solace in that I've met the fellow that I did my last consult with. I've met him since. And I told him, he knows me a little bit now. I told him what was going on. And he said, "You were great." He said, "You did great work. You gave great help." I was really satisfied. I take a lot of solace in the fact that I was a good lawyer. I was not the best. I was far from the worst, but I was a good lawyer and I helped my clients and I really worked hard to get great results and support them. And so I'm very pleased with that. I can look back on it with some pride. I went through that. I went through a staff meeting. I crawled out of the office, went to my doctors at lunch, told them what was going on, and they gave me a sick note that I sent my office manager from the car. And they said, "Okay." And then a week and a half later, they called me back to my doctor and said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I'm not going back." They spared me. They said, "They'll support you either way." I said, "I don't think I can go back." And they said, "Okay."
Do you mind sharing some of the things that your cousin said to look out for and that you were noticing in yourself?
I mean, I will say that I'm not a mental health professional, number one. And number two, I don't remember, you know, pardon me again, my brain at a certain point has protected itself.
Sure.
So I don't remember the exact details of the conversation.
Yeah, that's okay.
There's certainly, and there's lists you can find from professionals. Once you do start having ideations, once you start making plans, once you think the world would be a better place without you in it, people would be better without you here. I think, significant loss of appetite, significant. And I was not there, but I knew that was coming. I didn't want to wait there. That's a much harder state to come back from. And thankfully people do it. People survive depression, but that's a much harder state to reverse. And I was able to, as much as the choice was made for me, and I will talk about it today and I'll joke about it, I was still able to have some control in making that choice. And I'm so grateful that I did.
So once you got that sick note, you left your practice, what were the steps you took to start feeling better?
I'll tell you an interesting story. So I left, I took myself for lunch because I was a little hungry. And I instantly started to feel lighter. I started to feel better. I knew it would take some time. I knew I was fragile, but I instantly was like, okay, there's a weight off my shoulders. I don't have to deal with any of this right now. Like I don't have to check my email. I can turn it off the phone. I don't have to deal with any of this at the moment. I took a couple days, rested, walked, mid-July, slept, really tried to, again, very, very patient wife, really tried to take some time to recover. I went to, and I thought I was doing pretty well. I'm like, okay, this is going pretty smoothly. And the following Friday, there was a regular coffee networking session through the Chamber of Commerce out here that I used to attend. And I used to attend it, when I was in practice and trying to build my practice up. And it's a 8 to 9 breakfast, and I figured, okay, I can go. And so I went very gingerly. I certainly was not myself yet. I was quiet. I was, a little introverted, kind of shy, sat in the corner. I felt as though some normalcy would do me good, but I really was not up to being myself. And I didn't say much. I usually contributed to the conversation. This time I was pretty quiet, pretty laid back. And I was good. I held on, and I was, I felt I was relatively okay. And then in the last 10 minutes, the host, who usually, will lead the discussion, said, "Anybody have anything to celebrate this week?" And something hit me like a shot. And I stood up. I didn't cry. It was close. I didn't exhale. I didn't breathe. I bolted upright. I bolted out of the restaurant with the, like cartoon speed, head spinning, bolted out, went right to my car, drove home immediately, and crawled into bed. And I guess I was not at the point I was doing better, but I was not at the point I was able to celebrate anything, let alone even the successes of others.
Mm.
And it was such a strange reaction because it was so. I try not to be that impulsive. It was so guttural.
Mm.
It was just like before I knew it, I was in my bed, and there were probably 15 minutes had passed, and that time to get home didn't matter. Boom, done, out. I previously, when I'd left law the first time, I did a little bit of contract. I did some doc reviews. I did some contract review work that they hire lawyers for on short term projects, and it's fairly low stress work, fairly menial, not that exciting. But I knew some folks who had hired me previously, and I went to them and I said, "Here's my story." They liked me. They liked working with me. I said, "Here's my story. I'm in a messy state. I can come work, but I need some kid gloves for a bit." They said, "We got you. We'll hire you on, and we will make sure you don't get anything too grueling."
How brave of you to share that.
I know and knew before this the importance of the mental health conversation, that it can't be lip service. So I didn't expect it to fully be my own story. Like I said, I dealt with anxiety issues in the past. I had left my first college try at 17 because my mental health was, struggling in very different ways. I knew that, and I'd been through therapy. I try not to hide, but I also knew that okay, I'm a bit of a fragile lamb right now and need some extra TLC.
So how did that next phase end up going for you?
So the next phase was really me trying to sort of figure out what to do next. And my thought process, and I think it was accurate, was I'm not going back to law. I worked for, I will never, publicly call out my last employer, great guy, and very well respected. The other folks that I worked for, and they're all friends, funny enough, and they all know each other. Three Jewish guys from the same neighborhood. And all in the same line of work, and they go for dinner. It's my Mount Rushmore, I call it. They're cute. Um, but they were all, I worked for some really great people. And if I don't want to say I couldn't cut it, because I feel like that sells it short, that it was, a lack of effort, and it was not. But if it was not for me working with these guys, a different firm would not have been the magical answer.
Mm-hmm.
Working in a different environment would not have suddenly made things better. I mean, it was truly, I had a lot of problems with the business of law itself that I don't think, and the pace and the expectations, I don't think any change of scenery would rectify. And so I said, okay, so what's now? So I did some contract review stuff for the couple months it needed to get done. I mean, I needed to earn a living and, now pay a mortgage. And I really was not sure what the heck to do next. And that's, my business kind of started out of a question mark of, hey, what is this going to be? It took me, I gave myself a lot of grace over that summer and over that fall. And it took me a while to get better, and a while to really start to feel joy again where I should have felt joy, and feel like myself again, have my personality back again. It was a recovery period.
Does anything stand out as having been particularly helpful in helping you find yourself again?
That's a great question. I was pursuing counseling at the time, and I, was working with someone, and I did one or two sessions after I left, and he said, "Get out of here! Like you're fine. Like this will solve 90% of your problems." And he was right. I mean, it's not as though I had to continue with an aggressive program. I needed to just get out of that workplace. I think having the support of the friends and family and partner that I did made and I know it sounds cliche, made such a huge difference. Uh, Invaluable in that, especially in a relatively newer relationship, that I had the support of a partner that was incredibly helpful. That I had friends who wanted to see me succeed, and I was open with. It depends on how I would have framed the story. If I had framed leaving law as a mark of shame, as something that we don't talk about, etc., that might have looked very different, but I never did that.
Mm-hmm.
I always, this is what happened to me. People ask me today, and I'm glib about it, and maybe to a fault. People ask me today, why'd you leave law? And I say, I lost my mind. And, it kind of takes them aback, I'm sure. And I'm always happy to talk about it, as you can tell, very openly. Um, but I had a mental health crisis, and thankfully it wasn't too severe of one, but it was severe enough, and it caused me to make that change. And I'm happy to talk about it because what are we doing? Who are we helping if we hide in the shadows?
Absolutely. Are there things that stand out of the what your friends and family did to support you that were particularly helpful? And the flip side of that is, are there things that people did meaning to help, but that actually for you, not so great?
It's fun. I'm trying to think. I don't think there's anything that really stands out as a gesture on either side. I wish I had a better answer for you. There's
There's
nothing
no
that
right
kind
answer.
of. I think it was sort of in the overall approach, and I had already, I'm very close with my grandfather. He's 101, and he's starting to slow down a bit now, but he has always been very supportive. And he talked about, how this was already my second career, right? Law was, my plan B. I was supposed to be a journalist working, our national broadcaster, and, I was there for 7 minutes, but working the newsroom and pitching stories, etc. So this was already, me doing something else. And he said he always admired the fact that I, knew how to pivot, and
Mm.
that if I hit a brick wall, I don't stop. I go left, I go right, I keep going. So I think the way that I was treated, and not with any specific gesture or specific words, and my apologies to whoever's listening if there's something that I'm forgetting, because it kind of has blurred together in my mind. Um, but the way that I was treated, this is not a mark of shame. This is not the end of your career. This is not the end of the world. This is just another opportunity to reinvent myself. And I was never made to feel like I had failed, which that alone is the kindest thing you can do for somebody.
I think it's interesting. Um, a lot of people, my sense from having so many of these kinds of conversations is people are so worried about the potential for people to make them feel ashamed that they, and that they couldn't hack it, that it wasn't, they couldn't make it work. And don't necessarily realize that I think most people, and certainly the people you want to be hanging around with, aren't going to have that perspective.
No,
From the outside, it isn't, oh, they couldn't hack it, oh, they couldn't figure it out. It's, okay, well, good thing they figured out that this wasn't the right setup for them. And hopefully we can help them figure out, or be supportive in helping them figure out, what is something better. And so many people can get focused on, well, what are people going to think of me if I leave? How will I identify myself? Who am I if I can't do this? And if I'm no longer labeled as an attorney? And the answer is, well, you're still you.
yeah.
And that's really the most important thing that we tend to forget about.
There's an old joke, and I think it was my birthday card of, that at 20 you care about what everybody thinks of you. And at 40 you start to stop caring what everybody thinks of you. And at 60 you realize that nobody's thinking of you at all.
Yeah.
And if they are, they're thinking about what you think of them. And I think I sort of hit some of that, and I'm not even 40 yet, but I hit some of that in that point of, I don't really care. I am not going to. This was never in my mind a question of, oh my God, what will the neighbors think? That would have been, if I had worried about that, I won't reveal anything, but I've helped a lot of people with talking about this, and I've tried to do some one-on-one um, listening. I'm not a mental health professional, but I'm always happy to listen and, talk about my own version. And I spoke with somebody who has a lot of family pressures, and a lot of pressure sort of from all sides of family, and desperately needed to make a change, and has since made that change, but was really reticent because very old school traditional family of feeling like a failure, and that's
Yeah.
heartbreaking to me. I'm grateful I didn't have that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is right. On the one hand, there's, the people who have the concern that people are gonna have these expectations and they don't. And then the other side is the people who actually really do, and it's harmful. And how do you put that in a box and do what's best for you and not people who aren't you, which is everybody else?
Look, I had the only Jewish grandmother who was mad that I went to law school.
No kidding.
She said I should have been a plumber. She would have been right.
And do you still think about, well, maybe I should go in a different direction? Maybe I should go become a plumber?
I'm not headed for the trades. I think at this point, my body's saying no, no, no. But in retrospect, I mean, it's a pretty funny way to see it. You know, she complained the legal market gets oversaturated, and you know, it's a terrible way to make a living. And bless her, she wasn't wrong.
So, what are you doing now, and what were the steps that got you here? Because you seem to have found something that works for your extrovertedness, your storytelling, your personality, your values. Talk about that.
Yeah, I found a way to put it all together. And again, those people who supported me through, I'm really grateful to. So the first was my wife, and I will give her all the credit to the moon and back. But you talk about, you know, who are you and redefining yourself. And what she made me realize is I'm a writer, and I've always been a writer. I was a writer. I have my old journalism notebooks when I was 5. The old, you know, flip reporters notebooks with my like 5-year-old hand scrawled name and address on them. They're somewhere on the shelf. And I've been writing stories since I was, you know, 3 and 4. And I'm a storyteller and I'm a writer. That's just me. That's what I do. I was a writer in law, and I had a blog that won a couple of nationwide blog awards of the legal blog market. And I had won some other writing awards. And, you know, my last firm even hired me because I was a pretty prodigious writer, as was the firm owner. And he, you know, wanted to make sure that I could do some writing and help support that end of things. So that's always been a part of me. And that's always been part of how I've seen myself. I just didn't think I could make a living at it. One of the things that I said to myself when I was really trying to figure out what things looked like is I had a real history of betting on the wrong horse. I had a couple of job opportunities come up at different times where I took the one that wound up, you know, failing spectacularly. Not that the others would have been magical, hard to say, but I felt like I was betting on the wrong horse. And I realized that if I bet on myself, I can't lose. Mm. When you bet on yourself, you can't lose. And I said this at a phone call to my mother, and she went, "That's brilliant." I said, "That's, you know, it kind of makes sense to me of, okay, so that's where I'm sitting at with that. That's really cool." So I was trying to figure out, what does this look like? And, you know, I joke about starting this business. I still have the bruise from where my wife elbowed me on the ribs and said, "You're a writer, go and write." And I'm grateful. I never had the lawyer's ego. I avoided the lawyer's ego because those are, as you know, could be brutal. I had the writer's ego, which is, I don't care if you pay me, but you keep my name on this. I mean, my byline is all that I have. My words are my own. You can't take them away from me. So my name stays on. And I came to realize that doesn't pay at all. The ego rarely pays, but that certainly doesn't pay. And I said, okay, maybe there's some work here as a ghostwriter. And I really had no idea. I didn't know what the market looked like. This was fall of 2019. I put up the world's worst website, a couple of writing samples from, you know, blogs that I had done. People knew I was a writer. And so when I started, you know, putting it across my socials of, hey, I'm available to do some ghostwriting if anybody needs anything, the work started coming through. And a little bit fast and furious, which was great. And I spent a couple months working on some projects, helped out with, you know, my first website, edited someone's thesis, did some web writing, did some blogging for a couple clients. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe there's something here. And I was running a marketing business with no background in marketing or in business. It is completely, you know, pulled out of you know where, but figured it out, a lot of common sense. And then 6 months in, COVID hits, and Canada shut down for the better part of 2 years, which on the one hand was good for this business because everybody had to be online. On the other hand, the economy got tight, and so people started pulling back marketing budgets. So things got a little bit tricky, and I had to really reinvent what this looks like. And I kept doing the document review. I will be transparent about that. For like the first year and a half, I was doing both, and I was, you know, that was paying the bills while I built this up and trying to see what this looked like. And I kept at it, and it got a little better, and I was able to take it full time, and I haven't looked back. So, to answer your question, as I eventually try to do, 6 years in, I have a content writing business called the Right Stuff Agency. I do just about everything words related, which is your websites, your blogs, your newsletters, articles, ebooks, white papers. I'm now ghostwriting some books, which is very cool. I am doing a little bit of social media thought leadership for people who, have a big following but need to feed that audience. It's 95. I take my name off it. I have one or two clients use my name, so I don't say 100%, but 95% I'm a ghost, not just because I'm pale. It's truly, you don't know that it's me. You do if you start to hear some of, my verbal cues, but you really are not supposed to know that it's me. I'm hiding in the shadows. And it's been incredible and so much fun, and has grown by word of mouth. And I I do use the law degree to get me the seat at the table. I'm trying to earn whatever I spent on the damn thing. So it certainly opens some doors. I think it probably gets me taken more seriously, rightly or wrongly, than if I didn't have it. But I said in the beginning of this, I did not want to be another legal marketing agency. There's some great ones out there. They do great work. I didn't want to compete in that space. So I'm industry agnostic. I work with everybody and anybody and treat them all the same. And I have so much fun.
And you feel like yourself with this?
I am so myself. I am the happiest myself I've ever been. I'm really, the joke of recovering lawyer. I am almost 100% recovered. There's certainly elements that have played through in the rest of my life. So, in the way that I run this business, for example, and I mean, without getting too granular, but part of it is really in response to some of the traumas that I had. And, when I was feeling bogged down by too many tasks and too many tasks flying at me, it left me with a real aversion to tasks and processes. Mm. So I try to run this business with as little process as I can, unless necessary, which is a terrible way to run a business. And I do not recommend it. But there's certainly some trauma response that comes out of that. I laugh because, and I spoke at a Law Society event recently, and I will go anywhere to talk about storytelling, and I can talk about my experience and my journey. And I've done podcasts talking about mental health, and I can speak about it openly, and I don't really feel pain anymore. I went by the booth at the trade show for this thing of one of the legal softwares that I used to use, and I looked at the display screen, and it didn't hurt, but it was certainly that moment of too soon. I could have died happy never seeing that screen again. And I wish they're a great company. I wish them well. But personally, I could have died happy never seeing that screen again. So it didn't send me spiraling. It wasn't that, classic trigger. But it was that moment of, I don't know if that'll ever be 100%. And maybe that's just part of my story too.
If you had a magic wand and could change one thing about the legal industry, and I guess one thing about the legal industry specifically, thinking about the factors that contributed to you realizing, oh boy, I'm not safe here. What would that be? What would you change?
I think we really have to put some actual mental health safeguards in place. And I will preface that with, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if you know much about Europe and the way that, the working life works in some of the Western European countries, like I think it's Germany, where they have mandatory, 6-week vacations and, mandatory rules about, turning your phone off hours. And we think about that for North American work culture, and we're just balking because, that seems wild. And even, as an American, you're looking at me as a Canadian going like, you guys get an 18-month mat leave? What is wrong with you people? Because we're stuck in that sort of race to the bottom. So, I say it in a way of like, you could set a rule that all firms, have to close at 5:00. Okay, well, someone's going to buck the trend and then go until 6. Someone's going to say, fines be damned. We want to give our clients later service. We're going till 6. And someone else will say, F you, we're opening till 6:30. And it just keeps on spiraling. So we talk about mental health as though it's a priority, but we are rushing to sacrifice it in the name of client satisfaction, meeting unreasonable demands, creating emergencies where there aren't any, which is a
Mm,
huge problem. My wife's a corporate event planner, so she deals with a lot of that. Sometimes you create emergencies where they simply don't exist.
yeah.
And setting up. And if I don't know again what sort of the systemic structures have to look like, but I think that it needs to be dealt with, and especially with some enforcement. There are going to be. I mean, here, one of the rules I think now is that articling term, I believe now has to be paid at least in some capacity. You know, the same rules against unpaid apprenticeships. That like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
rules here against unpaid apprenticeships. I mean, you'll always have people try to skirt those rules and try to hire someone for the exposure or the experience. We're not a New York fashion magazine, and even they shouldn't be doing it because they have enough money. But like, and I'm not this crazy socialist screaming in the streets, but I think it's humane to treat people equitably. Lawyers are humans too. What you're seeing, and I don't know if the trend is where you are as much, but what you're seeing with a lot of younger attorneys jumping through the bar is they're not uh, standing for the same crap that older generation stood for, and so they're leaving, and so they're jumping firms or they're going to new environments, and the career loyalty isn't there anymore because they're not going to stand to be abused at 3 a.m. around an office table while they're sleeping under their desk, just because their predecessors did it. They won't, and so maybe that's where the sea change will start to come, but it really needs to be coming much. I had an interesting conversation. I mean, you can think to take this part out, but I was at a nationwide law firm. It was a fairly large firm up here, and they had all these events for International Women's Day, which is important, of course. But they're highlighting the role that women play in the firm. It's like I'd much rather see a day where you don't need to highlight this because it's just effing commonplace that women are in your top partnerships and top leaderships, and we don't even have to acknowledge that we're special because of it. Like this shouldn't be a thing that we're priding ourselves on. This should be the norm, you people.
Yeah, and bringing that into the mental health side, well, we're having these very focused conversations and developing, some firms more than previously are developing policies, but the individuals aren't necessarily on board. But, you might now have someone in a leadership position who has a title related to, wellness or well-being, and adding all sorts of activities and events and things that highlight, oh, we've heard mental health is important. Okay, but have we integrated that?
Exactly. What are
Have
we
we
actually
actually changed the
doing?
way we are operating? Are we treating people differently? It's not enough to just say, oh, I've heard of this. Yeah, the stats say we're not doing so great. All right, let's keep going.
Well, and the problem is that lawyers do not like to be told what to do or how to think. They like to push
What?
back against that. So, you could set legislation that orders this, and the pushback will be they'll push it through the highest levels of courts to fight against it. It's and we've seen disputes up here that all lawyers have to basically have a something of a DEI statement that was brought in a number of years ago of just how they're going to commit to sort of treating everybody. And there's a sample statement you can get for Law Society that is completely innocuous, and even then, people are screaming and protesting still years later. I don't think you're going to see it, but I really do wish it would stop being such a lip service conversation because you're going to lose people.
Oh, I mean, people are being lost, and I am somewhat encouraged by some of the people that I do see in some some firm environments that are going in there and adjusting policies and actually kind of infiltrating and adjusting how people respond. But there's the systemic side and then there's the individual side. And so until we can really get the vast majority of individuals on board along with those system changes and policy changes, and everything that goes along with the way we operate as an industry, there's still going to just be way too much that's still functioning in the way that we've known, and that's problematic. My hope is that we can get more and more people, individuals on board, And so that even though, I don't expect that we're ever going to completely eliminate the, all of the things that we know are problematic, but at least if people know where to go to find what they need and, environments that are healthier, people that care, at least those people will know where to go as an alternative and not feel forced to go to the people who are kind of stuck in the dinosaur ages.
Yeah. We can hope. I mean,
We can
that's,
hope. And we can be,
we can hope, we can push for change. It's,
yeah.
me telling this story over and over again, and I will keep on doing it. And like I said, in the last post that you read, is that I did it the 5th anniversary, and I got truly 5 people who were in a place that I was, or much worse. And, that at least they saw some light in my story, and that, there is a way out, because it feels like there isn't one, I'm sure. Then leading to, some have made some job changes, some have made some career changes. I think most all have sought mental health support from a professional. Again, I will never claim to be that, but that's so crucial.
Amazing. Anything else that you want to share that we haven't covered?
Thank you for having these conversations. Thank you for putting them. You have a tremendous megaphone at your disposal, and people, when you speak, people listen. And I think, I hope you know that.
Thank you.
And, that is a powerful, I mean, I'm often in the same boat, you certainly more so, but that is a powerful tool. And what you choose to do with that megaphone can change lives, and you're doing that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Everyone has a platform. It just looks different for each person. For some people, it's social media. For some people, it's, in-person communities. And your platform can be with 2 people.
Mm-hmm.
It all matters. And, the way you share your story, the way we each show up and share our stories and make the space for that, as you said, it really can save lives.
Yeah.
So if we can, I feel we have a responsibility to.
I will never stop having this conversation. It'll change over time, but I'll never stop having this conversation, to be part of this conversation, because it is a serious, serious one that needs to be had.
Agreed. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled we were able to do this and that we found each other in the first place.
Yeah, no kidding. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you got a ton of value from this conversation, and that you will check out the links in the description to learn more about the guest and the Wellness Esquire. And I hope you take even just 1 minute to do something for yourself today. Maybe right now, drink more water, say no, call a friend, do something that makes you happy, have a 30-second dance party, find something to make you laugh. Also, be sure to subscribe and send the podcast to a colleague. And if we're not yet connected on LinkedIn, please fix that. I'd love to know you. See you next time.